So when we get to page 40, Heidegger's idea of thrownness is critiqued in part. That critique is vocalized for Ahmed by Lefebvre and by Ahmed herself. The object could even be described as the transformation of time into form, which itself could be redefined as the direction of matter. And this is where we get to the idea of the sticky object that shows its travels on its surface. And this is Ahmed's gesture towards helping readers understand the idea of the way that experience is imprinted on the body. Um, what work goes into the making of things such that they take this or that form? This is where Ahmed goes into Marxism against a tradition of German idealism. Um, 41, objects are transplanted. They take the shape of a social action, which is forgotten in the givenness of the object. Um, and, contrary to this idea of a sticky object that shows where it's been, um, for many objects, for most objects probably, history cannot simply be perceived on the surface of the object, even if how objects surface or take shape is an effect of such histories. In other words, history cannot simply be turned into something that is given in its sensuous certainty, as if it could be a property of an object. And so, in this way, Ahmed's trying to say, we need to go further than the sensuous impression of an object into the history of its coming into form. And so this is where she's distinguishing between idealism and what Marx calls commodity fetishism. So 42, we get to Marx's Capital and the idea of commodities being made up of matter and labor. So in order to effect this pivot, Ahmed goes from talking about Husserl's table to talking about Marx's table, because it's required of every philosopher or political philosopher that you talk about your table. So there's the Marxian critique of commodity fetishism, which relies on a distinction between matter and form, that is, between wood and table. And she talks here about use value and exchange value, and this is some pretty central stuff to Marx's political theory. But she also writes, one problem with this model is that the dynamism of making form is located in the transformation of nature into use value. But we could see wood and trees as being brought forth and not simply given. And just to unpack this a little bit, there's this idea that, a tree grows, it's cut down, it's a carpenter crafts it into a table, and before that table enters the market, where it is, it enters this system of exchange value, which involves this phenomenon of the commodity and the commodity fetish. It's just characterized simply by use value. So you've made the table. How can you use it? And Ahmed here is suggesting taking this back even further and, I think giving some agency to like the tree in this example, and saying that is also a bringing forth. So she's just sort of moving things backwards along the chain. 43, Derrida remarks, suggests that the table in use is as metaphysical as a table as commodity. That use value, as well as exchange value, involves fetishism. And Ahmed agrees with this, but allows that use value is not so simple for Marx. And that a Marxist approach for Ahmed, the reason why she finds it useful is that it could allow us to consider the history of what appears and how it is shaped by histories of work. And in order to do this, she thinks through the arrival and use of her own table, including, and I love these moments in Ahmed where, she has hired people to bring it into her apartment, and there's the place on the wall where it dinged, and there's a ding on the table that corresponds to the ding on the wall. Um, and she concludes this passage by saying the object is not reducible to the commodity, even when it is bought and sold. Indeed, the object is not reducible to itself, which means it does not have an itself that is apart from its contact with others. The actions performed on the object, as well as with the object, shape the object. The object, in turn, affects what we do. And so this is her intro to the next section, which is simply called Doing Things. And this turns from the object, in not in stasis exactly, but we move to the object at work, or us at work with the object. Quote, objects are not only shaped by work, but they also take the shape of the work they do. And so in this section, Ahmed, who, as might be becoming clear to you, loves wordplay. She does a lot of wordplay around the multiple meanings of occupation, and to occupy. What does it mean to have an occupation in the sense of a job, or to occupy oneself, or for and how is that distinct, or how does that add layers of meaning to the idea of occupying a room. 45, for Heidegger, what makes the table what it is and not something else is what the table allows us to do. And this is where I'm imagining this section, Doing Things, as being about the table in motion. This section is all about the phrase "in order to." Quote, the "in order to" structure of the table means that the people who are at the table are also part of what makes the table itself. Doing things at the table is what makes the table what it is, and not some other thing. And this is one of the reasons why I personally find phenomenology so fascinating, because it's not we've gone from a place where there's me and then there's the table, and we've arrived at this place where the table and I are doing something in dialogue, something that couldn't exist without my approach to it. So yeah, toward the end of this page, Ahmed talks about how Heidegger and Husserl differ with respect to their stance on the equipmentality of objects. And this is another key word for this chapter. In ordering his phenomenology around equipment, Heidegger departs from Husserl by suggesting that the pragmatic orientation of things is associated with their being, or what he describes as the equipmentality of objects. So 46, what objects do is what brings them forth in the shape they have. The capacity is not so much in the tool, but depends on how the tool is taken up or put to use. So then Ahmed turns to Heidegger's notion of bringing forth. The object is an effect of bringing forth, where bringing forth is a question of the determination of form. The object itself has been shaped for something, which means it takes the shape of what it is for. So, her primary example for this is the table is assembled around the support it gives. The function of the table, depending on what kind of table we're talking about, is to hold things and to hold them in such a way that to hold the paper such that we can write on it, which requires its surface being hard rather than soft. It necessitates a certain amount of space. It also facilitates writing in certain ways. It might have a drawer for paper or some sort of niche for pens. So Heidegger's differentiation between using something and perceiving something, I mentioned that we would come back to this earlier. Ahmed talks about Heidegger's example of the hammer, which he uses to illustrate his distinction of present to hand versus ready to hand. And this is a useful distinction, I think. So which I will continue in the next video segment.